it's really about owning your own stuff where you feel uncomfortable to be more available to other people at a deeper level.
One of the, and I was going to ask this a bit later of you, but one of the traits that you display probably better than anyone else I know, and I've got so much more of an appreciation for this now because Amanda taught it to me after I was just quite blind to it, is just this fierce openness, you know, because what can happen, especially if you say go to a retreat like that and you feel humiliated and you leave, and like that would be really tough. And most people would just walk away and all they could be consumed by is just negative emotions. But you've gone off, you've had all these different interactions with people, reflected, and it's actually turned out to be quite an amazing experience. And I think because you were fiercely open to, all right, well, what's going to come out of this? Why has it gone the way it has? Similar to the experience you had, 10 years ago. But yeah, I just wonder, like, because I know obviously this has been something you've practiced for a long time, but how can people get that openness? Because I think it's so hard for people to be open like that. It certainly took me a long time.
Mm-hmm. It's not like everybody doesn't feel humiliated sometimes.
Sure.
You mean, if I say the word humiliation, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the one that is really, really good to remember is when you say you're lonely.
Okay.
If you were the only person who was lonely, no one else would understand what that word meant when you said it. Everybody knows what it feels like to feel lonely.
Right. So there's like some universal feelings that everybody can recognize. Yeah,
and I think that, I think when we are really lonely, we think we're the only one who feels like that. But actually everybody feels like that. So it's actually really easy to go up to people and go, I feel really lonely. Mm-hmm. And people go, yeah, I felt like that way too. I mean, it's very few people who would be hard-hearted against that. Maybe as a child, we might have been bullied or teased or something or denigrated for having that, don't be man enough or whatever, you're too sensitive. But as adults, actually, we're much nicer to adults than we are to children. So in many ways, because we just go, yeah, well, I know that feeling. Well, I've been there. So
yeah, true.
To me, it's just remembering that everybody else has been there too. So that's the real thing, I think.
So it seems to me like what you're saying, and maybe this isn't what you're saying and you can correct me, but is that really the only way to do it is just to do it. Like you just have to, like one day, just make yourself vulnerable enough and maybe find the right person where you feel safe with them to be vulnerable. And once you find out you survived that experience, you can do it again more easily the next time.
Yeah, I've had a lot of therapy. I just want to put in there. I had a very complicated childhood where I just did not feel I could be vulnerable. And because of all that scorn and self-righteousness and humiliation, that was really very complicated personal circumstances that I think a lot of people have experienced, but now we're more open about disclosing. And so when my therapist, she's very skilled and she just let me say it. And she herself had owned her own shame. And I think that's a really difficult one to own, is when we feel shame.
True.
But I was like, wow, I just feel a ton of shame about this. And, not everything goes through my head is good, it's kind, it's polite, So I had to practice on her, and then I practiced on my friend. And then, but, you can, if you're in a Buddhist community or something, you can just practice. Yeah, for sure.
Because that's part of the culture within the community. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think so. And there are people you shouldn't be like that with.
Well, of course.
Don't start with family members.
That's true. No, that's a good point though, really. Because a lot of people would start there.
Well, if you have a good relationship with a family member, why not? But if, like me, it's been a bit more complicated and you've spent time being away from them because you found them a little bit difficult, definitely don't do that. You know, it's about understanding the difference between being honest and disclosing. And it was a psychoanalyst called Nancy McWilliams who described that line. You know, always really important to be honest. Don't always have to disclose. And I think Brene Brown has started to look at that. Yeah.
I was just thinking of that when you said that, because she says, what does she call it? Oversharing, or like vulnerability is not oversharing. They're not the same thing. Or she says something like that.
Yeah, just was it vulnerability doesn't mean you are without boundaries.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yep. Yeah, I know, it's funny because as soon as you said that, her name popped into my head. Yep.
Yeah. And
that's really fascinating though, because I feel like those two concepts are really, like, people perceive them to be intertwined. So it's like, all right, obviously vulnerable, and you see some videos, and it's not to downplay maybe the cases that are quite authentic and maybe healing for some people, but you know, there's almost like a movement towards like, okay, I'm gonna jump on camera and be incredibly vulnerable, you know, cry and do all these things. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know if this is serving the purpose. Like, are you doing this as clickbait, or are you doing this for healing purposes? Because I don't think you're gonna, you know, like jumping on Instagram or LinkedIn, I don't think that's the way to heal. I think, as you said, you do need to probably go away and sit with somebody, maybe, you know, start with someone impartial who can reflect things back on you. But I'm noticing that Amanda and I have talked about it a little bit, and it's like, it's good to maybe open up online, because you're seeing more and more people now talking about languishing and the difficulties of COVID and stuff, which I think is really good, you know, and it's Men's Health Week at the moment, so there's more discussion around men's mental health issues. That's good. But then I think, yeah, as you said, you can go too far and all of a sudden be really oversharing, and people get uncomfortable, and then it actually kind of, I think, does the opposite of what maybe you hope it does, you know?
Well, right, exactly. Yeah. Well, then you're opening yourself up to be humiliated, I would think.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you're always going to be open to be humiliated. You can ask a question, and and somebody's just going to take offense to it, or they have their own sensibilities or sensitivities, whatever. You know, I was thinking about that thing about Instagram, and I was watching a television program recently about the Byron Instagram thing. Adam, you may be more aware of this.
Not too familiar, no.
What is there was a program about Instagrammers in Byron Bay, and how they're kind of like this lifestyle or whatever, and you know, and the women who were interviewed on that, so I'm not an Instagrammer, I'm not in that kind of thing. They actually talked about how much support they got from their communities, and how that actually they were giving initially, and that's what kind of thing. And then they talked about their postnatal depression, and people were just like, oh, I'm so glad you talked about it. Sure. I can see you're completely falling apart, and me too, I've been there too. And so they found themselves being really supported by it. So I think what I learned in that experience on that retreat a decade ago was that everybody has a different perspective. And what is treasure for me is rubbish to you, you know. So I think we don't have to say everything, but maybe sometimes it touches a nerve for somebody, and it's just that thing that they need to hear. I don't know.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And so I was going to ask you a question originally about some of the key teachings of Buddhism. And I think, you know, after you and I had a quick chat, it's probably quite a big ask, really, to encapsulate a huge spiritual practice and be like, right, Wendy, you are now the Dalai Lama and you must tell us all the details. No, but what I was thinking, instead of maybe flipping it to, because we have talked in the past, you and I, a little bit about some of these concepts of emptiness. And I love the fact that you've gone on a retreat thinking you knew about emptiness, and then you're like, nope. I've got some work to do. That's great again.